Hello and welcome to a more perfect podcast. In this episode, I am proud to have on the great Chris Feistl. Chris Feistl is a cartel expert, and he was instrumental in taking down one of the largest cartels in the world. During his DEA career, Chris worked all over the world, including 12 years, over 12 years in Colombia, and while there, he managed and directed some of the DEA's most significant investigations, from transnational organized crime groups like the Cali and North Valley cartels to designated foreign terrorist organizations such as the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC. You might have heard of them. He also wrote the amazing book After Escobar. I was actually reading it myself, and we were just talking about it. I was up at like midnight reading it, and then suddenly it was 1:30 a.m. And the writing in the book is phenomenal. The story is even better. If you've seen season 3 of Narcos, you'll enjoy the book even more. So I highly encourage you to check it out. It's a great book, very, very well written. So Chris, welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you on.
Thanks, Dylan. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. So first question I'd like to ask you is, what inspired you to go into law enforcement? Can you tell me about your law enforcement history?
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic that I didn't really have any plans to go into law enforcement. It wasn't really on my radar at all at the time. I was in college and I was majoring in law and political science. I had aspirations to be an attorney, to go to law school. And
Mm.
during the summer of my junior year in college in 1984, I went down to the beach, to hang out with a couple of my friends, do a little surfing, and just hang for the summer. And of course, we needed to look for jobs while we were there. And I had talked to a few people who told me to go to the municipal building because they were hiring lifeguards and seasonal or special police officers. So, I mean, I really didn't have a clue at the time what a seasonal or a special police officer was. But as I went in there and I found out is that a lot of these beach communities on the East Coast, that during the summer, the population really swells. They get a lot of visitors to the beach during that time. So they hire these special police officers. So, I went in, I checked it out, and I paid $5 an hour back in 1984. So I said, what the hell? I need a job, so let's go for it.
Yeah.
And I went to a 1-week training academy. I learned about New Jersey state statutes and laws. I got to carry a weapon, if you can believe that, after 40 hours and 1 week of training. And we were
Wow.
basically released onto the streets of the beach town of Wildwood, New Jersey, to enforce the laws and statutes of New Jersey and the city of Wildwood. So, after doing that for the summertime, I parlayed that into an internship at school. I wrote a couple papers, and while I was there, I had a chance. I was in a bar at night, and at the time I was
Mm.
only 20 years old, so I wasn't even technically legal to drink, although I was carrying a gun, which is kind of crazy. And this girl approached me in the bar and offered to sell me methamphetamine.
Mm.
So we got into this conversation. Long story short, we set up an undercover deal, and it was really that experience in New Jersey and that working undercover at such a young age that got me looking into, what, maybe I should look at a career in law enforcement, because I really enjoyed it. And it sounds kind of cliche, but I thought, what, it's kind of my duty or my part to do something good and to try to stop the flow of drugs coming into the country. So I looked into the DEA, FBI, CIA, a couple other federal agencies, and ended up getting a full-time job as a police officer in Virginia Beach. So that's kind of like what really propelled me into a law enforcement career.
Interesting. Interesting. So across your whole law enforcement career, from the beginnings in Virginia Beach, and then all the way, or I'm sorry, in New Jersey, all the way to your DEA career and beyond that. Um, what were some values instilled in you that might inspire others to lead a better life?
Well, I definitely have to say leadership, you know, trying to do the right thing, having ethics, drawing, a lot of people have that decision of whether or not they want to do right or wrong or do good or bad. And, I've always been one of those people that, I always tried to do good. And, it really bothered me that a lot of these people who were dealing drugs and stuff were, making so much money off it. And they were really destroying a lot of lives. And that really, kind of stuck with me. And that was one of the driving forces, I think, at least with me, to kind of pursue that career. But, I think you have to be ethical and, really decide what you want to do and how you want to do it in life.
It's a good answer. So what inspired you? So you said that you wanted to, stop the flow of drugs coming into your country, that, you had this moral duty. Why Colombia?
Well,
why did you want to go to Colombia?
It's for the same reason I wanted to go to Miami when I was in the academy, in that, back in the 1980s, when I was in the academy and they asked, where do you want to go? And I was like, well, late 1980s, there's only one place to go if you want to work drug law enforcement in the U.S., and that's Miami, Florida, right? It's the home of Miami Vice. I mean, who wasn't watching Miami Vice in the mid-1980s, It really put a spotlight on South Florida. And, also it was the home of the cocaine cowboys, and it was arguably one of the busiest places to work in the United States for drug law enforcement. So in my mind, I always thought, if I want to be the best DEA agent that I possibly could, I need to go to the busiest place. I need to go to the place where I can learn the job the quickest, and I need to go to where the action really is. And again, that was South Florida. That was Miami. And then, of course, after Miami, I thought, well, if I really, really want to be a DEA agent, I got to go to the mecca of drug trafficking. I have to go to the heart of where everything happens. I have to go and work against the biggest and the baddest drug cartels on the planet. And, of course, that was Colombia. So for me, after working in Miami, mainly against Colombian drug trafficking organizations and the Cali and Medellin cartels, that was really like the next logical progression for me, was to go down to Colombia.
So, were there any cases like you told me about, your kind of breakthrough case with the woman in the bar? Were there any cases that really stuck out to you in Miami that really, got you saying, this is it, this is what I need to do, this is the real threat that's going on in this country?
There were actually a few of them, and over time, while I was in Miami, that I began to work on a lot of maritime smuggling investigations where we were posing as transporters, right? So we had a very good setup there. We had access to a lot of good assets and sources. We had access to go-fast vessels. We had access to coastal freighters, and we had undercover houses in the Florida Keys. So we would pose as transporters through the sources that we had, where we would offer our services to bring in large amounts of cocaine or marijuana from Colombia or Jamaica or wherever in the Caribbean into South Florida. So it was mainly through those maritime smuggling investigations that we started to target, some of the fringe elements of the Medellin and the Cali cartels. So those smuggling investigations really got me involved in what was going on in Colombia. I got to know the players of the cartels, and I thought, that's where I really need to go, because I have a pretty good grasp on what the cartels are doing, who is in the cartels, how to investigate them. So that was kind of my next step.
Interesting. Speaking of investigating them, and I promise you we'll get to the Cali cartel in a bit. Speaking of investigating them, how did you get that intel on the cartels? Like, how did you know the shipping routes? How did you know, where they were going to come in, how they were going to come in, and how were you able to put yourself in the position to pose as a transporter of those drugs?
Well, it was mainly through assets that we were able to recruit, sources, defendants that we had arrested in previous investigations who had decided to cooperate and help out the U.S. government. And in doing so, they had the network and they had the contacts in Colombia to arrange for that cocaine or that marijuana, depending on what we were transporting. And that through our sources, our informants that we had, we were able to get access to, a lot of these freighters and go fast boats. So it takes time, and it takes, you have to have a good set of informants or assets to be able to communicate with the people in Colombia and establish that trust.
Interesting. So through these informants and sources, okay. So, one of the big questions is, and one of the big questions that I have for you is, for anyone who doesn't know, which is especially for people in my generation, what was the Cali Cartel? Everybody's familiar with the name Pablo Escobar, but not many people are familiar. Well, I don't want to say not many people, but people aren't as familiar with the Cali Cartel. So can you give a brief synopsis of what they were?
Sure, and it's very true. Everybody who you talk to has an idea of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. They've seen the movie Blow. They've seen a lot of different things regarding Pablo Escobar. But even within DEA, there's a lot of people who aren't really familiar with the Cali Cartel, and that's because they did things a lot quieter than Medellin did. And, if we look back at the history of the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar, they ruled through, violence, threats, intimidation, murder, extortion, kidnappings. They were blowing up, the Avianca flight. They were assassinating government officials. So they were really, Pablo was the first narco terrorist that there was. So people are familiar with him. But the Cali Cartel has been in existence pretty much just as long as the Medellin cartel and Pablo was. But they did things a lot quieter, right? They weren't into the high-profile violence and killings. They weren't into the government assassinations. Their MO was to buy and to bribe people in high positions so that they didn't have to kill them, that they could just buy people and get what they wanted. So the Cali Cartel can trace its roots back to the late 1960s from a criminal group that they formed called Los Chemas. It was founded by Miguel and Gilberto Rodriguez Oruela, as well as Jose Santa Cruz. Those were three of the founding members of the Cali Cartel. And they initially started off as a kidnapping ring. And in 1969, they were able to kidnap two Swiss citizens, a diplomat and a student. They got about a $700,000 ransom, and they used that money from the kidnappings to get into the drug business. And they started off with a little bit of marijuana, but they decided that there was a lot more money and it was a lot more profitable to get involved in cocaine. So, they started by just driving a few kilos of cocaine up the Pan American Highway through Central America into New York in the early 1970s. And, once they got the cocaine into New York, the rest is history, as they say, because the cocaine was very popular. It exploded onto the market. These guys set up an incredible base of operations and a distribution outlet in New York, and over time it expanded to, the whole United States, as well as Central America, South America, Europe, and pretty much everywhere.
Oh wow! So they were all over the world.
They were all over the world, and just to give you an idea, at the height of the Cali Cartel's dominance of the drug trade, you can go back to the late 80s and even into the early to mid 90s. They were responsible for 80 to 85% of the cocaine that reached U.S. soil and 90% worldwide. They dominated the cocaine trade on 6 continents, and I always say if Antarctica had a drug problem, it would have been 7 continents. So these guys were making billions and billions and billions of dollars.
That's insane. I've heard, and we were talking about this beforehand, but there was a war between the Medellin and the Cali Cartel. This war, can you tell me about it? Can you explain why they went to war?
Sure. Again, this is another, kind of unknown fact a lot of people didn't know, but Cali and Medellin, they started off in the 70s. They were collaborators on a lot of things. They worked together. They were friends. They were partners. They invested in a lot of different stuff. But in late 1987, of course, what happens is, let me backtrack a little bit, but so in order to prevent competition and to give everybody kind of a fair share, Cali was awarded the New York market, and Miami was awarded the Miami market, right? So that kind of allowed each cartel to operate in that area without having any kind of major confrontation. And the rest of the U.S. was kind of up for grabs, so that anybody could traffic anywhere in the U.S. except for those two areas. They were exclusive to each cartel. And in 1987, they had kind of a falling out where one of Pacho Herrera's men, who was the fourth Cali Godfather, along with the Rodriguez Oruelas and Jose Santa Cruz, one of his guys shoots and almost kills one of Pablo Escobar's assassins. So Pablo Escobar basically goes to the Cali Cartel and says, hey, I want you to turn over Pacho Herrera and the assassin, or we're basically going to go to war. So Cali refuses to do that, and of course they start the war. Pablo declares war against the Cali Cartel. Cali, being the smart guys that they are, says, well, Pablo's crazy, and if he's going to declare war on us, we need to strike first. So what they did and this is very famous, it's very well documented, back in January of 1989, the Cali Cartel puts a massive car bomb in front of the Monaco building, which is where Pablo Escobar was living in Poblado in Medellin. And it was an armed fortress. And the car bomb didn't kill Escobar or any of the major players there, but it caused a lot of damage. So, of course, that was the full-on start of the war, which would go on to last for 6 years. There's a lot of parts in this war that sound almost like movies and a movie sequel, stuff that's really, really hard to believe. The Cali Cartel goes to Europe, and they try to bring in these mercenaries, these soldiers of fortune, to launch a helicopter assault on Pablo Escobar's finca.
What?
Yeah, it was crazy.
A finca is like a farm, right?
Yeah, a big
like
ranch.
A ranch. Okay.
Yeah, and it was in the Magdalena Medio region, and it was where he had the zoo and the hippopotamus and everything. And
wow.
Of course, the helicopters crash. The pilot gets killed. Some of these soldiers of fortune are injured. So the operation goes to shit. And then they decide, well, let's go to El Salvador. We'll buy 4 500-pound MK-82 bombs, and we'll just drop a 500-pound bomb on Pablo in his prison, Catedral. So they're going through these really outlandish scenarios to try to kill each other and launching these different assaults. So that this whole bloody war goes on for 6 years. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people were killed, and it was a very brutal time in Colombian history.
Why didn't you just let them duke it out? Why didn't you?
Well, the Colombian government pretty much did let them duke it out, and the war only ended when Pablo Escobar was killed in December of 1993. So that was really the end of the war between Cali and Medellin when Escobar was killed.
Okay. So this ending of the war really gave the opportunity for the Cali Cartel to grow into the largest cartel in history, or were they already the largest?
They were already there, and let me tell you how and why. Because, so we just said Pablo Escobar was killed in December of 1993, right? But what happens is twice during the 80s, Escobar declares war against the Colombian government. The Colombian government declares war back. And, this is when in 1989, Escobar, he blows up the Avianca flight. He blows up the DAS building that kills wounds over 2,000 people. He assassinates the presidential candidate, Luis Carlos Galan. So they're in a major war, and the Colombian government is really going after the Medellin cartel, right? They kill Rodriguez Gacha. Pablo Escobar is pretty much underground, hiding. They have him on the run. And in 1991, in June of 91, Pablo Escobar surrenders to the Colombian government, right? So he goes into Catedral. He goes into prison for a year. Long story short, he decides he doesn't want to be in prison anymore. He kills two of his associates, Galliano and Moncalo, and basically walks out the back door of Catedral. And then again, it's another manhunt. So Escobar, as you can see, from 89, 90, 91, 92, he's really on the run. He's in hiding. The Medellin cartel is being decimated by government operations. The three Ochoa brothers are in jail. So this is when you see Cali really start to rise up in the late 1980s, 89, 90, 91. And by this time, they have become the biggest and the largest drug cartel in Colombia, supplying, like I said, 80 to 85% of the cocaine that reaches U.S. soil.
Interesting. So let's talk details of the Cali Cartel. There's an episode of Narcos called the Cartel KGB, or maybe it's the Cali KGB. I can't specifically remember. Cali KGB. Thank you. Can you tell me any specifics of how deep the intelligence apparatus of the cartel really went, of the Cali Cartel really went?
So the Cali Cartel had arguably one of the most sophisticated intelligence and counterintelligence networks that any drug trafficking organization has ever had and that we've ever seen. To give you an example, back during the war, as we talked about, between Escobar, they purchased an IBM AS 400 mainframe computer. This computer at the time was about 7 feet high, 4 feet wide, and the storage that it had was, you couldn't even calculate the amount of storage that it had. And what the Cali did was they were able to put a lot of their intelligence and counterintelligence information into this computer. And what do I mean by that? They had Cali's telephone directory in the computer so that they were able to crisscross and track telephone calls. So if we suspected you, Dylan, of being maybe an informant working with Medellin, they were able to punch in your telephone, see how many times you called Medellin, see if you called the U.S. Embassy, maybe you were working with the DEA or the CIA.
Wow.
And then they had the ability to wiretap over 400 telephones a month in Colombia. Now, this is a drug trafficking organization that had connections in the phone company that allowed them to wiretap several hundred telephones a month. Now, at the time, there weren't very many governments in the world that had the ability to wiretap 400 telephones. So they were very sophisticated. They had the entire motor vehicle division of Colombia downloaded into that computer. So if I saw your car and it was suspicious, I was able to get your license plate, pretty much run it, and get the ownership information back. Then they would cross-reference your name in the computer to see if you had any ties to any kind of Medellin operatives. And if you did, they would stop you, interrogate you, and if you happened to be a Medellin operative in Cali, during that time the war was, and you were trying to do something to the Cali leaders, well, you didn't last very long there. They were able to track, flights. They had access to flight manifests, right? So, so a lot of times when flights were coming from Medellin into Cali, they would have their counter surveillance teams at the airport filming each and every person who came off the airplane to try and identify any kind of Medellin operative. So they had, by many accounts, up to about 5,000 taxi drivers on the payroll. These taxi drivers were the eyes and ears of the Cali Cartel within the city of Cali. So basically, nothing came into Cali, nothing came out of Cali, and nothing moved around in Cali without the cartel knowing. They had all the hotels wired. So if any foreigners or anybody came in that was suspicious into the hotels, the clerks, the people who worked there, all these people would report back to the Cali Cartel. So they had, their communications. They had encrypted radios. They had repeaters on top of mountains that allowed them to communicate. So they were very, very sophisticated. Wow. And obviously, with that counterintelligence network, very hard to penetrate the cartel. Plus, they were able to corrupt the majority of people in Cali that worked in the police, the military, judges, prosecutors, governors, representatives, so it was a very, very difficult place to work. Almost, to throw out kind of a similarity. It was almost like working behind the Berlin Wall because they knew everything that was going on.
That's insane. That is absolutely insane. Like, besides the obvious, besides cocaine, where did they get all the money to do all this? Like, were there any other ways they generated profits, or were they just solely focused on cocaine?
Just mainly on cocaine, because they were sending out hundreds of tons of cocaine to the U.S., to Europe, and when you look back in history, you go back to the early '70s, the mid '70s. Kilos of cocaine in New York were going for 50, 60, $70,000 a kilogram, right? For a minimal investment in Colombia, they were making substantial profits, and then when they expanded into Europe, cocaine was even more expensive in Europe. So, they were just making money hand over fist. Plus, the other thing is too that these guys were not stupid, right? They invested in a lot of properties and a lot of businesses, right? They owned banks. They owned at their height over 400 drugstores that they were laundering money through. They owned radio stations. They owned a soccer team. They owned a bank in Cali. They owned a bank in Panama. They owned the concession for Chrysler Motors. They owned laboratories. You name it, these guys owned it. Thousands of properties that they owned. In the mid '80s, the Cali Cartel, the cartel, was responsible for 40% of the economic development that was going on in Cali, right? So these guys were building hotels, financing shopping centers, hospitals, everything. So they had so much money they didn't even know what to do with it. They owned so many properties that some accounts, the joke we used to say all the time in Colombia was Jose Santa Cruz, the number 3 man in the Cali Cartel. The rumor was that he owned over 2,000 pieces of property. 2,000. That's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. Speaking of those godfathers of the Cali Cartel, can you tell me about the organization of the cartel? Like I've heard that they had a military, and then they had other segments of the organization, and they all worked together in tandem to form this highly organized criminal enterprise.
Right. So you had initially you had 3 leaders of the Cali Cartel. You had Gilberto Rodriguez Oruela, who was the oldest brother, Miguel Rodriguez Oruela, and Jose Santa Cruz Londoño were the 3. After we talked about the war between Cali and Medellin, when that war started, the Cali Cartel brought in Pacho Herrera, who was actually the 4th godfather. So at that time, you had the 4 leaders of the Cali Cartel. And I think what you were getting at is that the way they were set up like a Fortune 500 company, right? They were like the Ferrari of organized crime, the way they were set up. And
wow.
They had 5 separate compartmentalized divisions, basically, in the cartel. And the first one was and I'll just go in no specific order, but the military wing, right? So the military wing was their counterintelligence wing, the corruption of officials, police, military, any other corrupt officials, the sicarios, the assassins, the recruitment of informants to infiltrate, whatever that they were doing, and security for the cartel. So that was the military wing. Then they had the financial wing, which was the one responsible for laundering their money. They had the legal division, which was represented any of cartel operatives who were arrested. They employed a whole bunch of different attorneys, as well as corrupt officials, to try to pass legislation or to prevent legislation from being passed in Colombia. They had the political division, which was the recruitment of and bribing of senators, congressmen, the president, judges, anybody else. And there was one other division, military, legal, political. I can't think of the other one right off the top of my head, but so they had those 5 divisions. They were all compartmentalized. They had these cells set up throughout the United States where they were super compartmentalized, where if you had 15 cells operating in New York, one cell didn't know what the other cell was doing. So if somebody got arrested in that cell, he couldn't say what the other cells were doing, or if that whole one cell got knocked out by law enforcement, it didn't affect all the other cells that were working in that area because they just didn't have the knowledge. They didn't know. So they were almost set up like a terrorist organization. So very hard to penetrate,
That's crazy.
very efficient, and it worked very, very well for, over 2 decades.
Wow. So, okay, so you have this almost, and I say almost because they obviously were eventually taken down, but almost impenetrable fortress of this criminal organization. Can you tell me about any specific operations you took part in against the Cali Cartel? I heard about Operation Cornerstone on Netflix. Was there any other, breakthrough investigations?
Well, Cornerstone was the largest investigation that was ever undertaken against the Cali Cartel. So
Tell me about that.
So this was an investigation based out of Miami, Florida. It was a joint investigation between the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and at the time, U.S. Customs. And how this investigation got started is that there was a large shipment of concrete fence posts that came in from Venezuela into the port of Miami on a coastal freighter. And upon further inspection, U.S. Customs and DEA determined that I think it was about 2,000 of the fence posts contained cocaine. So when they started drilling into these fence posts, they found the cocaine. Ultimately, they found about 12 tons, 24,000 pounds of cocaine that was sent from Venezuela to the U.S., and it was the Cali Cartel's cocaine. So that's what started Operation Cornerstone as a result of that seizure. And over the years, they were able to recruit a bunch of different assets, launch a lot of enforcement operations in South Florida and elsewhere. They began to go up on wiretaps and knock out some of these money laundering and drug trafficking cells. So Operation Cornerstone was the most significant investigation undertaken against the Cali Cartel. And, at the time, in the mid-90s, 1994, 95, they had probably arrested almost 100 people and seized almost 100,000 pounds of cocaine. So it was a very, very successful operation. But on the ground in Colombia, we were doing operations every day. Right? We were working in conjunction with the police, with the military, and we were basically, my partner Dave Mitchell and I were embedded with the search block in Cali to go after the Cali Cartel, and we were doing raids, every day.
Raids on safe houses, raids on potential operatives,
associates of the Cali Cartel.
You wrote in your book, and I'm gonna, and if you don't mind me doing a little bit of spoilers about the intro.
No, go ahead.
Because it's actually stuck in my mind. That's how crazy the writing is. There was like this cartel, and you got almost double crossed on an operation, or was I not reading that right? Like you had an informant, and then you had this police car drive up to you, but the police were corrupt, and they drew their guns on you, and you had to throw all your identification in the grass or whatever. Can you tell me about that? What was that whole situation? I'm just curious.
Sure. So that specific instance that you're talking about is when we were able to recruit a very high-level asset who was actually the head of security for the Cali Cartel. And we were meeting with him in a secret location, an hour outside the city of Cali. We had to meet, in these like very obscure locations because, he was the head of security for the Cali Cartel. So obviously he couldn't be seen talking to 2 6'3" blonde-haired Americans, or as he told me the one time, if we're seen together, it's not going to work out well for either one of us, which was true. So we had to meet in these very remote areas. This specific instance, we were in a sugarcane field, again an hour outside of Cali, and while we were there, unbeknownst to us, jumping ahead a little bit, is that a taxi driver was robbed and his taxi was stolen. So there was a heavy police presence in the area, and we didn't know that. We weren't counting on some kind of carjacking happening because generally there's absolutely nothing out there in that area. And while the police were looking for the taxi and the carjacker, they happened to roll up on me and my partner Dave Mitchell as we were talking to the head of security for the Cali Cartel. And of course, we were basically operating in an undercover capacity. We couldn't be identified as DEA agents because it would risk the life of our assets. So we basically had to throw our weapons, our IDs, anything that we had on us that would, potentially identify us as American agents. And we used the story that we were working at a joint agricultural center, that me and my partner were German scientists. We even had fake IDs, but we had to throw them away. Ultimately, we had to the police wanted to take us down to the police station. They were suspicious of what we were doing there, and we basically had to bribe them to let us go so as not to compromise our informant.
That's insane. That's insane. Okay, well, that clears some things up. Tells you the real lengths that you have to go. The strides that you have to make sure these people are safe, because these people are like really valuable. I don't want to say chess players, but chess players in your game to beat these cartels. That's very interesting. So 2 more questions about the Cali Cartel, and then I just want to ask you a few questions about the modern day stuff.
Sure.
What was the ultimate blow that took down the Cali Cartel?
I think the biggest blow that took down Cali was the arrest of Miguel Rodriguez Oruela in August of 1995. Gilberto Rodriguez was arrested in June of 1995. Jose Santa Cruz was arrested in July of 1995. But Miguel Rodriguez was really the CEO. He was the manager of everything that went on. He was very hands-on. Everything went through him. He controlled everything. He was really the guy who was running everything at the time. So when we were able to arrest him and take him down in August of 1995, that was a very crippling and debilitating blow to the cartel, because that really took out the guy that, the mastermind, the guy that was running everything. And from there on, they kind of floundered around, and we were also able to recruit or be able to extract out of the country the chief accountant for the Cali Cartel, Guillermo Palomari, who provided devastating testimony against the cartel and their financial empire. So I think those 2 things were really the ultimate blows that kind of brought the cartel to their knees. Even though they existed for, a while longer, they were nowhere near the same as they were. They didn't have the power or the influence that they once did.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that pretty much answers my questions. So let's move into the modern era here. What's different about the cartels today versus back then? Or are there any similarities?
Well, I think the main difference now is that back then you had the Colombian cartels that were basically controlling everything. Now you have the Mexican cartels that are really the cartels that are the most powerful and that control, the cocaine trafficking, the fentanyl trafficking, the methamphetamine trafficking, even the heroin trafficking coming out of Mexico. So things have changed. Everything is in Mexico now. You have multiple cartels. You probably have 8 named and designated foreign terrorist organizations operating out of Mexico right now. So they are by far the biggest threat to us and to the United States.
I would agree so too. Yeah. Do you think that? I think that designating them foreign terrorist organizations was a long time coming. I'm assuming you're in agreement with that too, right?
Yeah, it was long overdue. It has been talked about for, probably 5 or 6 years, maybe even more, about designating them as foreign terrorist organizations, because you bring a lot more things into play, right? You bring a lot more resources to the table. You bring in other charges to put on these people, providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization. You bring in other agencies and their resources, and you bring in technically the possibility of what you see now, some of these kinetic strikes in the Caribbean going after these go-fast vessels.
Oh, yeah.
You also sanctions being put on some of these organizations as well as some of the governments like Venezuela. So by that designation, I think you bring a lot more options to the table.
Okay. Okay. Well, we're shooting down these Venezuelan drug boats. Everyone's talking about the Cartel de los Soles in Venezuela. Do you think shooting down these drug boats isn't effective policy at all when we have, as you said, a lot of the traffic going through Mexico? Like, do you think what we're doing is effective?
Well, I think it's part of a bigger plan, and I think yes, it is effective because where is a lot of that cocaine going from Venezuela or off the north coast of Colombia? It's going into Mexico, right? And from Mexico, it'll come into the United States, or it'll go into Mexico and it could go to Europe, or it could go to different islands in the Caribbean and then go to Europe. So I think definitely it's part of a more strategic plan. I think these kinetic strikes are just the first kind of thing in the plan. Nicolas Maduro is indicted in the United States.
Yeah,
Drug trafficking, money laundering, terrorism charges. There's a $50 million reward on his head for his
almost makes me want to go to Venezuela.
I think it makes a lot of people almost want to go to Venezuela.
Yeah.
So I think that's designed to, one, put pressure on him, because I'm sure every night that he goes to sleep, he's probably sleeping with one eye open, wondering if his own people are going to come and remove him from office because he's basically an illegitimate president who lost the election last year.
Yeah, he did.
He has to worry about a coup by his own people. He has to worry about a potential invasion from the United States, very similar to what happened in Panama in 1989 with Manuel Noriega. If you remember, Noriega was indicted in the U.S. on drug trafficking charges. We invaded the country to basically arrest him, brought him back to justice in the United States, where he served a significant prison time. So there's very, very similar circumstances to what happened in Panama in '89 and what's going on in Venezuela right now. So I think, like we said, the airstrikes, the indictments, the labeling him as a terrorist organization, along with the Cartel de los Soles, all this internal pressure and conflict. I think it's all part of a bigger, broader strategic plan.
It's a very smart answer. It's very insightful. Yeah. I like that. So how do you? Okay, so this is a little bit out of left field, but I try to ask all the DEA agents I have on the show this. How do you feel, as someone who fought in the war on drugs, about the legalization of marijuana? Do you think it's a gateway drug?
I always try to stay away from these kinds of questions and answers because, anybody who's in favor of legalizing it, I'm not going to change their mind. And those who are in favor of trying to debate me, they're not going to change my mind about it. So, I'm not in favor of it. I think it most certainly is a gateway drug. I think that, you see all the issues and the problems that you have. Look at what happened in Portland and Seattle, where they tried to decriminalize small amounts of, cocaine, marijuana, heroin. I think they were even talking about fentanyl. What a disaster!
Yeah, they wrecked their states.
Yeah, it turned out to be a disaster, right? And the more readily you make this stuff available, the more people are going to use it. The more crime is going to happen. All the calls that I went on when I was a police officer, most of them were related to drugs somehow or another. It was domestic, it was burglaries, it was robberies, people trying to get more money. There's a whole bunch of circumstances that go into this. And if you look at too, I read something a while ago, and I may get some of the details wrong, but the over 50% it was of the traffic accidents, after they investigated them, they found out that people were either on marijuana or some kind of drug, that potentially contributed to the accident. So, I just don't think it's a good idea. I think it opens up to, a lot more issues, some of which we just talked about.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so last few questions here. You got the DEA Administrator's Award of Honor. What's the story behind that? What does that mean?
That's DEA Award of Honor is the highest award that DEA has. That and the Award of
Yeah, it's
Valor,
pretty cool.
and it was basically for myself, Dave Mitchell, Jerry Salome, Ruben Prieto, our DEA unit that worked in Colombia in conjunction with the Colombian security forces when we took down the Cali Cartel. So we were basically awarded that for our time and our years of work in Colombia going
Okay.
after the Cali Cartel.
Okay. Um, so modern stuff again. How do you feel about fentanyl? And this just happened. How do you feel about fentanyl being classified as a weapon of mass destruction?
I think again, I think it's a great
It's
idea.
awesome.
If you
Yeah.
look back at the history of almost 100,000 people per year have died from
Yeah.
fentanyl, and just a couple, what they say, like almost 1 or 2, 3 grains of salt, that's enough to kill an individual. And you have this fentanyl.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. And now you have carfentanil, which is even more powerful than fentanyl, which is we're starting to see a lot more of. But you
What
have
is that?
this. It's just a much more potent form of fentanyl. But
Okay.
you have these chemicals coming into Mexico from China, India, even Germany, and you have these Mexican chemists or other chemists that are making this fentanyl or and mixing it with certain drugs. Now, do you really think that they care if they happen to put a couple extra, grams or pieces like the size of salt into whatever they're making and it kills
No.
people? They don't give it. They don't care. And these aren't trained chemists. These are people that they just taught how to, to mix the stuff together. So it basically is a weapon of mass destruction. And if you have, averaging 100,000 deaths a year, that's, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. I know someone who had overdose, and thank God he survived. But it was really scary, and I feel like eventually, if this continues at the rate it's going, everybody's gonna know somebody, or at least know somebody who knows somebody who had a problem with drugs, who had a
That
problem
was
with
the
this stuff.
that was the point I was just going to make, and it's not out of the realm where, like you said, most people or just about everybody knows somebody or somebody knows somebody else who has overdosed or died because of fentanyl. So it is a very, very serious problem, and hopefully it gets addressed. And I like the other thing you're seeing too is you're seeing a lot more charges where people are being charged federally for murder, for the killing of people because they're distributing fentanyl that has killed somebody. So you're seeing more
Hmm.
investigations related to that, more of those charges. I think that's a good thing. I'd like to see some stiffer penalties as far as fentanyl trafficking goes. I wouldn't mind seeing some kind of minimum mandatory sentences come back, where if you're caught with, X amount of fentanyl, you do X amount of time in prison, no questions asked, no discretion by the judge. For just throw it out, we'll make something up. If you have a kilo of fentanyl, you do a minimum mandatory 10 years in prison. Boom, something like that.
Yeah,
So
probably. Yeah, in my opinion, it should be more. But yeah.
yeah, I mean that was just an example. I'm just throwing it
Yeah,
out. Whatever,
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that you have X and you do X amount of time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, in this day and age, do you still believe that Colombia is a narco state? And I'll leave you with that.
Colombia narco state
Is Colombia a narco state today?
today. Let me go back. I'll answer it. I'll answer your question, but let me go back. In the 80s and 90s, it was. I think it got better for a while, and that it wasn't a narco state. But I think it's starting to trend back towards becoming a narco state. You have a president there now, Petro, who a lot of people don't know. He had ties to guerrilla organizations when he was younger. He's a very left wing politician. I don't think he has the desire to go after a lot of these drug trafficking organizations. You've seen coca production explode in Colombia over the last 5 years. Exponentially, the amount of
Really?
production has increased. It's gone through the roof. Um, although we do have a decent working relationship with him, the DEA in Colombia, I think it's trending back towards a narco state. I don't think it's there yet. I hope it doesn't get back to that. But if something isn't done soon, I think you may see it become a narco state, almost like Venezuela is now.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I'd heard, that Petro was taking down some of these labs, but now you're telling me that the cocoa production is actually going up. I tend to believe you.
Oh,
Um,
I mean, you can do the research. You can just look and check out how much the coca cultivation has gone up over the last several years. And,
yeah.
you've seen the Clan de Golfo, which was just recently designated
I'm
as a
sorry.
foreign terrorist. The Clan de Golfo, a drug trafficking cartel in
Oh,
Colombia,
okay.
was just designated as a foreign terrorist organization, I think, just last week. So you're starting to see signs of increased trafficking with these organizations. You have remnants of the FARC, you have the ELN, you have other guerrilla groups that are there, you have remnants of the AUC, the paramilitary groups that are still around. So
Mm-hmm.
it's trending in that direction, but it's not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for all the insight into the Cali Cartel and to the the modern steps that we're taking against the uh, the threats that we're taking seriously today, like fentanyl, like Cartel de los Soles, all of that. So thank you so much for being on the show. And just a reminder to everybody, you can see it behind him, but buy After Escobar. You can buy it on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description on all the episodes, whether you listen to it on Apple Podcasts or YouTube. It'll have a link there. So check out After Escobar, everybody. Is there any final comments you'd like to make to our listeners? Maybe about your book or your experience, maybe about drugs or whatever.
Sure, I encourage people to go check out our website, www.afterescobar.com. It's got a lot of cool photos. It's got a little bit of background about the book, a little bit more history. The audio book for After Escobar is released tomorrow. So the
Oh
audio
wow.
book will be available starting tomorrow, available on Amazon and Audible, along with the paperback and e-copy. So I'm all over social media. Anybody who ever wants to reach out, ask me questions, nothing's off the table. I get questions frequently from people all over the world, just hitting me up on Instagram or Facebook. What about this? What about that? Always open to questions. Happy to answer anything that anybody has.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate it.
All right, bye bye. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of A More Perfect Podcast. Please follow me on Instagram at hosted by Dylan. You can find all the links to all my social medias in the podcast description, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on YouTube. They're all there. Please check out Chris's book as well. It's very good, as I said multiple times throughout the episode. And thank you for listening. And as always, have a more perfect day.